Disability services in higher education exist because the government tells us that it should. There is a federal law called Section 504 of the Federal Rehabilitation Act that says no otherwise qualified individual should be excluded from participation in any program that receives federal funding. That is UNLV. The good thing is it provides us such a broad umbrella of access. I've worked in many areas of disability. I've worked in ADA compliance for a city. I've worked in independent living, leading some statewide independent living efforts, legislative efforts at the state level, and I've chosen for my career to be in higher education because those laws provide us such a broad portfolio of access for students. So we exist as a go-between for the institution and the student, for the instructor and the student. I'd say the big misconception is that students believe that we're institutional advocates, especially if we don't give them what they ask for. And instructors believe that we're student advocates, but the truth is we're institutional advocates. We advocate for institutional access. So that is part of the framework. The other framework is the Americans with Disabilities Act. If you have taken a ramp like that exists outside of this building or outside of a grocery store or restaurant, those were mandated to be put in place by the Americans with Disabilities Act. That was last updated in 2008. So when we talk about higher education and disability, we're talking about students who are coming here on campus through the same admissions process as anyone else. In K-12 education, you have education and you have special education. There is no special education at the higher education level. So if a student is in your class, they're expected to learn the same material that all of the other students learn. I say it this way. In K-12, their mantra is success. They're there to make sure that you successfully complete a traditional education and graduate. And in my work, we're cheering for you. We want you to be successful. We'll refer you to lots of other great campus resources like the Academic Success Center and the Writing Center and other resources on campus. But our mantra is access. You're here, you're given access to demonstrate what you can do, to demonstrate your ability. And I tell parents that when your student walks across the stage in 4 years and they gain a diploma from the University of Nevada, Las Vegas, that diploma is going to carry the same weight of academic rigor and value to future employers as any other student. And I'm committed to that. So, how does this impact you as educators? And it's that we need assistance to access the material. I don't know what you're going to teach. I'm not an expert in sociology or psychology or mathematics or science, but the instructor brings that expertise. And our goal with access is to make sure that a student can access those same concepts, that they can get the same material, that they can make the same arguments as all of the students. And when they need assistance to do that, that's where my office comes in. All right, so let's name some different disabilities. Who can name a disability or disability type? So let me do a hard one. Let's do learning disabilities. Who's heard about learning disabilities? All right, so a learning disability, what it shows is that a student is intelligent. To actually score for a learning disability on an exam, you have to score in the normal range or above, and then when we look in those metrics, it looks across different types of learning, and we'll see that there's a deficiency in one or more areas. So a person might have a verbal memory where they can remember almost everything that you would say to them, but they may really struggle to take in that information in the written form. So that's when we come in with a potential accommodation of electronic textbooks, because that's allowing the student to work in a way that they can learn well. So learning disabilities, ADD and ADHD. So that is a person who is distractible, who has a lot of energy. And it's really a challenge for somebody with those skill sets. You know, they might be able to work all day in in a hands-on job. But when you ask that person to sit down for 8 hours in a high school setting or in a college setting, it can be a real challenge. So if you're naturally distractible, what do you think might be a way that we could accommodate that in the higher education setting? Okay, Ashley.
Testing in a testing center or a testing room.
Okay, so testing in a testing center. The DRC has a testing center, and one of the accommodations that we provide is reduced distraction environment, not to be confused with distraction free. We never promise a student that their experience will be free of distractions because we can't do that. So what we do, we're not diagnosticians. I'm not a psychologist, a psychiatrist, or a medical doctor. My background, I'm an educator by training. So when a student comes in, our process is a 3-step process. They're applying for our program, they are meeting with a disability specialist, and then they're requesting specific accommodations that have been agreed upon. So how it works is this: the student, fresh-faced student, brand new to UNLV, they'll come in or they'll fill out a form online, and they will disclose to us what disability they have and how that disability impacts them in the college environment. Once they do that, we as a team will review their disability documentation, and we're trying to answer 2 broad types of questions. Question 1 is, does this person have a disability? Yes or no? Once we determine that yes, you do have a disability as defined under the law, then we're trying to determine what is the functional impact of that disability and what potential accommodations could we plug in. So when I talk to people who aren't familiar with this field, they'll say, oh, you serve students in wheelchairs or students that are blind or visually impaired, because we still have a picture in our collective mind of disability as something that you can see, of people that demonstrate to be different in some way. And I do serve students who are blind or visually impaired or deaf or hard of hearing, but those make up a small percentage of the students that we serve. The majority of the students that I serve experience invisible disabilities like I discussed before, so ADD, ADHD, a learning disability related to reading. Dyslexia, that's a term that's on the rise. So struggling with reading, or dysgraphia, struggling with writing. Dyscalculia, struggling with mathematics. So once we've determined what their disability is, what the functional impact is, then that's when a student we would talk to them, and we would determine some potential accommodations that could benefit them in the classroom. And the great thing about my office is that once a student discloses to us, that documentation, their specific disability information, stays solely with my office. It's not located anywhere else on campus. And as a faculty member, you don't need to know, neither do you need to have the responsibility for knowing that information. How we communicate with faculty is through our accommodation forms. If you're a GA or a TA, actually the lead teacher in a class, you may have received these from one of the students. And all that we say is this student has been determined to be a student with a disability under law, and my office, as the expert unit in the university, has determined that these accommodations are appropriate. On this example, I list accessible furniture, books converted into alternate format, audio recording class lectures, note-taking services. When we do allow recording, we stipulate that it's only for personal study purposes and won't be shared. So I had a professor I talked to the other day, and he said, if a student's recording, I'm afraid that my lectures are going to end up on CNN. That must have been an exciting class. And we actually have a form that we will complete if a professor requests, and it delineates both the rights and responsibilities for the student and the staff member. Luckily, I've not had to initiate action against anybody in quite a while. And then we're also asking that the teacher assist us in locating a peer note taker. So let's talk through some of these accommodations. So books that are converted into alternate format. UNLV is very lucky in that I have a staff member whose sole purpose is to deal with assistive technology issues. So he spends 40 hours a week, every week, both providing materials in an accessible format for students and then meeting their needs through technology. His name is Andrew Louise, and he is exceptionally talented. If you are ever interested in any of these topics, he loves to talk about them. So when I talk about making a book accessible, what does that mean? On a good day, that means that we're able to write to the publisher to request an electronic copy of the book, to put it in a piece of software, and we're good to go. On a day when that's more challenging, there may not be electronic files available for that book, so we'll take the book, we call it chopping it, we'll literally cut the binding off the back of it, put it through a scanner, that'll create a PDF file. That PDF file will then go and be OCR'd, so using optical character recognition to determine what the words actually are, and then we'll format that so if a student needs to have that book read to them, that a computer can do so. That can be a very laborious process, and that's why we're always reaching out to faculty and trying to preempt the need for materials and talk to them about how are you designing your class. When you're putting up an article, for example, do you think about how you get that article? So let's say that you find the greatest 10 pages on political polling. We're in a presidential season right now. So if you find this information, here's what's easy to do. So let's say that you have a printer scanner fax, and that printer scanner fax has a wonderful button on it that says PDF. So you take that physical paper and you put it in the printer scanner fax and you hit the PDF button. What it does is it basically converts those into pictures and then into PDFs. There's absolutely no material that the technology can grab onto to guess what that is saying. If you had a blind or visually impaired student in your class, it would say unidentified image. So, what is the better way to do that? If you go and you search through EBSCOhost or another electronic database, most of those materials, I would say about 80% of newly posted materials are actually designed in an accessible way. So you could take that PDF, upload it to your web campus, and the student is good to go. As an instructor, when you create materials like your syllabus, are you laying that out using a certain structure? It's good to think about it this way. Imagine that you had to use your computer and you couldn't have a screen. When I talk to IT people, I say Google is a screenless user. When your materials are being scanned by Google and ranked in a search engine, they're using the same technology that that Assistive Technology uses to read that page. So a lot of pages that have bad Google rankings are also done in a way that is inaccessible. If you do it in a way that is accessible, such as instead of scanning it as a PDF, you actually write the syllabus in Microsoft Word. A screen reader won't delineate between the types of fonts. It uses a heading structure. So if you're working on your master's or your PhD, you probably know much more about formatting papers than even I do at the moment. But you're using that heading structure right now to delineate different types of information. So if you posted a 25 pages of content, is the only way that you would want to be able to read that information from top to bottom? Or would you want to be able to stop and to navigate through for different reasons? And that's what heading lets you do. If you break your document up using headings, then a screen reader will pull that out and it will tell a user, this is heading level 1, this is heading level 2, this is heading level 3. So this is the topic on Republicans, this is the topic on Democrats, and this is the topic on independents. We'll talk more specifically about how to do assistive technology a little later on. Classroom furniture. So we do have students, young and old, slim and not so, that need particular things for particular reasons. I actually have a member of my staff, Bernadette, who has placed over 50 chairs on this campus for students who have a physical need. So we literally will put furniture in place when needed. I spoke about audio recording class lectures. We have a relatively new piece of technology called a smart pen. It was originally developed for the business world, for secretaries and people that were in a lot of meetings. And the smart pen is 3 devices in one. It's a pen, it's a microcomputer, and it's an audio recorder. What it will do is it will record the lecture, and as you're writing, it's time syncing what you're writing with what's being spoken. So a person can go back the next week, the next month when they're studying, and they can say, I remember that my instructor said something about that. They can literally tap their pen on that spot on the notes, and it starts playing at that very moment what was being said. How it's doing that is the paper that it's using has thousands and thousands of microdots on the page, and that's serving as the point of focus. So we have a lot of students who in the past would use a person as a note taker who now have increased independence because they're able to take their own notes using a smart pen. Peer note takers. So when a student has difficulty taking notes, and often this is because of ADD or ADHD, they may need to focus specifically on what the instructor is saying, and for their mind to switch from listening mode to note-taking mode to listening mode to note-taking mode would cause a distraction for them. So we'll actually recruit a peer note-taker in the class, have that person take notes on behalf of the student. The note-taker turns the notes into our office, and then they're picked up by another student. The student with a disability never has to be known if that's their choice. Talking about disabilities, autism is on the rise. What is autism? It is a neural condition where a person has difficulty understanding moods of language. So if I say, you look nice today, we all in this room understand what I've said and why I've said it to you. It's part of our social grace to be nice with to each other. And likewise, if I say, wow, it looks like you got hit by a train last night, for a person with autism, they might not be able to realize that you're not literally talking about being hit by a train, so they'd be like, wow, how did you survive that? And I'm like, no, not really. It was just up late watching the Rebels play. So we don't know why autism is on the rise, but we know that it is. And we know that there are an increased number of gifted people with autism. Dr. Temple Grandin is one of the world experts in that. She's a world expert in autism, a person with autism, and a veterinarian. She has posited that the way that her brain works is similar to the way that certain animal brains work. She says, I'm able to understand the behavior of beef cattle because I notice how they react in certain situations, and that's similar to how I would react. When we talk about students who are deaf and hard of hearing, you think traditionally of a person who is deaf and who's always been deaf, and traditionally the accommodation for that was sign language. But we've now had 50 years of various programs. So there are several different languages that a person who's deaf might be fluent in. They might be fluent in American Sign Language, they might be fluent in Signed English, or they may have been placed in a school program where it's called oral education. So they were taught primarily to read lips. And I've been told that my lips are very easy to read, but if I were to have facial hair or a beard, then the visual cues that person is trying to pick up on would not be present. A few months ago, I was in a meeting myself and one of my supervisors, and he happens to wear a beard, and the person was able to understand what I was saying, but then when Jamie was talking, he wasn't able to grasp that information. It took me a few sentences. I'm like, oh, that's what's going on. So to level the playing field, we will actually put either a sign language interpreter in the classroom or a CART transcriber. CART transcribers originally were people who took the notes in a courtroom. If you've ever watched Matlock, and they'll say, reporter, will you please read back? the defendant's statement. So they've now taken those skills, and we can put a transcriber in the classroom. We'll put a laptop or a tablet with the student, and they can see in real time what is being said. Can you imagine that? Imagine that you're the person hearing the information, dictating it for the student, and then getting it within about 10 seconds. But that's what we're able to do as far as technology goes. American Sign Language is interesting because it is English, but it's English structured using French grammar. So when an interpreter is interpreting, they're actually literally translating on the fly, because they're taking that material, they're putting it in the proper grammatic structure for ASL and giving it back out. And it's an interpretive language in that there are signs and symbols for many things, but not for everything. I don't know that there are signs for all of the different gems and elements that you might learn in a chemistry class or a geology class. But so the interpreter has the choice. Do we finger spell that? So do we actually give it as a specific word that a person would then learn and know what that means? Or do we reinterpret it? Do we take another word in ASL and use that in its place? Or do we take two words in ASL and create a compound word? If there was one thing that I could impart to every faculty member, it would be that we're here to help and support you. And if you have a question, it's always good to reach out. Our challenge is when a person creates a whole course and we determine that it's not accessible, and then we have to go in and literally retrofit that course on the fly for the student. And it's just like an architectural retrofit. I can tell that this is a relatively new building. It was built with certain features in it for environment and safety and convenience. So this is a brand new building. If we took a 100-year-old building and we tried to put some of these same features in place, we could do a good job. We might provide access, but we wouldn't provide the same level as you would have in a new building here. And that's the exact analogy for a course. If we're retrofitting a course, we're glad to assist you in doing that. We must do that for legal compliance reasons, but it's definitely much better to do it on the front end. Let me go through some of our more unique accommodations, discuss why we put those in place, and then we'll talk more about kind of access of the future and where I see my field being both in the next 5 years and hopefully on through your long and illustrious careers. So if we know that we're going to have to assist a student in putting certain things in place, it might be good for us to have as much time as possible to know about that. So we provide priority registration. So the way that works on this campus, if a student is determined to need accommodations that would take some time for us to put in place, we will allow them to have priority registration with the understanding that once they pick their classes, they're going to notify us so that we can start that access process. The other accommodation that we will sometimes give is a reduced course load. So to be full-time at UNLV, is it 12 hours or 15? 15. So 15 hours. You might have a student who, because of their disability, it takes twice as long for them to study. So we might allow them to take 12 hours or 9 hours in certain specific cases. We're glad to do that. The federal government has their own rules and regulations for financial aid, and so that sometimes will be an issue. I discussed how we put note takers in place. If you have a student who, through our office, requests a copy of PowerPoints, again, that's another learning tool for them, and it might be used in conjunction with notes to make sure that the student's able to learn and to study. Enlarged copies of materials. I talked about alt format books. And I talked about alt format books for people who have learning disabilities. But let's talk for a moment about students who are blind or visually impaired. So, do textbooks today just contain text? If you're a historian, perhaps you read a lot of older books that are just text. But in every field today, When you now pick up a textbook, you not only have a book with text, but you have charts, graphs, and graphics. And all of those mean things, and they're important to the learning environment. So we're not only charged with providing access to that text, but if a student were to need it, we would have to describe all of the graphics. So can you imagine going through a 500, 600, 700 page textbook and looking at every graphic and trying to find a way to describe the content and context of that graphic? That's some of the work that my staff tries to do. There's tension right now between textbook companies and schools, because textbook companies are run for profit. So that means they have salespeople. Salespeople like to make sales, and salespeople will honestly believe that certain things are being done. So I have sat in many a room with salespeople, and they'll tell me, our materials have been completely checked and they're totally accessible. And I find out that, well, we thought they were, and we assumed they were, and we used the newest software, so we thought that would be in place, but they'd actually never done a check to see if that was the case. So if you're ever choosing a textbook for a course, or you're writing one that's going to be used, reach out to my office or the office equivalent on whatever campus you end up at and say, I have concerns in this area. Can you evaluate this material for me and let me know if it will work? If you do that, you will become my best friend. All right. So, real-time captionists, we talked about CART transcribers. There's another technology that's sometimes used, which is TypeWell. So what TypeWell will do is it's meaning for meaning. So it may not be word for word in the way that a CART transcriber, that a court reporter would do it, but what you're doing is you're taking in sentences of information, you're distilling that meaning, and you're giving it back to the student. Math classes. So if a student has dyscalculia, they may not want to be an engineer, but they may have a math requirement in their undergraduate distribution. So we will work with students and we'll say, is this a disability where you just need to spend more time studying? If so, then we may give you extended time for testing, and we may refer you over to the Academic Success Center for tutoring. If it is a disability where you have a significant deficit in math, then we may request that you take a specific math class that has been designed here at the UNLV for struggling learners called Math 121. That class is by referral from my office only. So it becomes very popular and people think, I can go through an easier math. Well, yes, you can, if it's appropriate for your major and it's deemed as necessary by my office. All right. Service animals and emotional support animals. So, if an animal ever comes into your classroom that is not a dog, it is not a service animal. Some schools are allowing in very limited circumstances a miniature horse. And that is honestly for people who would either need the stability that a miniature horse would provide, or imagine if you're a blind person and you're allergic to dogs. How are you going to have a seeing eye dog if you're allergic to dogs? But 99% of service animals under the law are dogs. So if somebody says, I have my service frog or my service snake, or I don't know why this has become a thing, but I have a sugar glider in my pocket, please contact my office so that we can meet with that student and educate them that that is not a service animal. That is, if anything, it may be a pet. It's most likely a pet, but it could be an emotional support animal. So if you've ever heard that language, a service animal is an animal, a dog, that is trained to provide a specific service for a person with a disability. So, If a service animal comes into your class, you are legally allowed to ask only 2 questions. Is that a service animal for a disability? If that answer is yes, what service is it trained to provide? Those are the only 2 questions we're allowed to ask under the law. The animal is required to be behaved and to be under the control of the owner. So if that animal is howling in your class, please contact my office and we will reach out to the student and look into this matter further. Okay. There is another classification of animals, and there's several terms now being used. Therapy animal, help animal. We, as the university, use the term emotional support animal. And this can be different types of animals. As I said, for a service animal, we're only allowed to ask 2 questions. For an emotional support animal, they have to provide documentation to my office to demonstrate that there is a need based on disability to keep this animal. The animal is limited to their residence. So if they're living on campus, that means their dorm room. It does not mean the cafeteria. It does not mean the quad. And it does not mean your classroom. If you have a student and they come up to you and they say, I have thus and such disability and you need to give me X, Y, and Z. Our university has charged my office with being the determiner of disability status and accommodations on this campus in the academic realm. So I'm asking all faculty and staff, do not provide a student disability accommodations unless you receive a form like this from my office. We call this an accommodation plan or an accommodation letter. So if you have a student who says they have a particular disability and they need certain particular accommodations, ask them, do you have a letter from the Disability Resource Center to provide me? If they say no, please refer them to my office and then send them an email with your referral carboning my office. Our email address is drc@unlv.edu. This does 2 things. It allows me to know that this student has made an inquiry and my staff can reach out to them and if necessary take them through the proper channels to be registered. It also helps us cut down on people who are trying to abuse the system. 99% of the students I deal with are hardworking, engaged students. They just want to come here, be a student, get an education, and be successful. Sadly, there is a small number of people who are trying to unfairly take advantage of the system. The reason that I don't want you to provide any accommodations is, A, you're experts in your content area and nobody's asking you to be an expert in disability, and B, if the student were to become cantankerous and you had provided them with accommodations, they could say, Professor Jones has regarded me as having a disability, so that means you must provide me these things under the law. So, I always give the example, and I'm happy to again, that several years ago, I had a student tell a professor that they had multiple choice anxiety disorder and all of their assessments needed to be given in short answer format. For the record, that would be an unreasonable accommodation. That would not be something that we could do. For the second point, thankfully, the instructor reached out to us. My office had never had any contact with the student. We had no documentation that they had any type of disability whatsoever. That was an interesting conversation. As far as I know, they never made any more requests for their multiple choice anxiety disorder. If when you get this accommodation letter, it is going to list the accommodations in 2 broad categories. So classroom accommodations and testing accommodations. As I mentioned, we're blessed to have a testing center. If you have a student who qualifies for testing accommodations, we are here to help and support you. We do that in the following ways. If a student receives testing accommodations, we have green forms. These are called test accommodation forms. This form is something that after you receive the accommodation letter. The student is to meet with you at a time of your mutual choosing, so that doesn't mean they can buttonhole you at the end of class, and it doesn't mean that they can interrupt your lecture, but they can meet with you in your office at a time of your mutual choosing and complete this form. You're able to list all of the dates and times for the exam. You'll tell us how you're going to get the exam, and what, if any, aids the class will be using. So some instructors will let you have a note sheet, some won't. Some will let you have a calculator, and some won't. Our testing center, we see it as an extension of the classroom and an extension of our support to you as the faculty member. So we're not going to allow a student to use anything for non-accommodation purposes that they wouldn't be allowed to use in the classroom. So once you and the student fill this form out, you give it back to them, they turn it into us, and we contact you. The great thing is all you have to do is send us the exam, and we will return it to you. We take care of all the work on our end. So what we can and cannot do as far as accommodations. I mentioned that the university has determined that they can have a special math class for people who have a significant math disability. One of the things we look at is we look at a student's major, and is math a significant part of that major? If it is, then we cannot accommodate your math piece, because the academic department has determined that it's important to know how to do certain types of advanced math in learning this major, economics, chemistry, for example. So when you read these accommodations, we've determined they're appropriate, but we're always wanting to work with you and understand what your class looks like. Because classes and the academic rigor that you and the department have chosen to put in are your business, and we're here to help and support you in that. So if you get this form and you have questions about how do I implement a certain particular accommodation, or rarely I'm afraid that if we put a certain accommodation in place that it would change the course, that's a discussion that we're glad to have with you. I had a professor that had a class on a very, let me give an example. We have students who have the recording accommodation. And if you're in a graduate program such as social work, part of that training is to go through therapy sessions. And recording of therapy sessions could be very sensitive. So we have to determine what parts could we reasonably record while maintaining the ethics of the profession and of the degree. The example I give is if you don't drive, there's no way we could accommodate you in a truck driving course, at least with the technology that exists now. Here's where we run into a problem. An instructor has a concern like this, and they tell the student, I'm not able to do whatever particular accommodation it is. So I'm not able to provide you my slides because the instructor says they're my copyrighted material. Okay, if the student wanted to sue, it could be seen that that was what's known as an institutional response. So if you're a GA, a TA, or a professor, you are an employee of the university, and your actions may be seen as official actions of the university. That's why we're asking you to reach out to my office and work through these issues, because we don't want a student to say that Professor Jones did not accommodate me. Because then we have to go and we have to determine, is there a legitimate issue with the student? This comes up in that professors are by and large very nice, very caring people. And you'll say, well, I have a student in my class and they said they had a disability, so I wanted to provide them certain particular things, and you're doing that through the semester. And let's say that the student is less than stellar in their study and preparation habits, and they fail the midterm exam. And it looks like they're going to fail the final exam. And then they come in and they say all of these wonderful things that you've agreed about aren't going to work for them. So my office does not provide retroactive accommodations. So we're really in a pickle of how do we make sure that the student really is getting what they're entitled to. All right. I think that's a good place for me to stop and take some questions. And I'd really like to hear from all of you. I could talk all day long. Yes, ma'am.
Question. I'm not sure, just if you could help me to where I should refer the student to, but English is not their first language,
Mhm.
so with an exam they'd ask if they could use a dictionary.
Mhm.
But I have a huge class of like 150 students,
Mhm.
and I don't really know how to accommodate that. I don't actually know if that's the case or not.
Yeah. Honestly, what I would say is refer them to the Office of International Students and Scholars, because that's the area that is expert. I have, and here's the question. So let's say you had a student that had a request that's not a disability request, such as the dictionary, or such as with computers now, they're bringing powerful tools into the learning environment, but some instructors believe they're also bringing powerful distractions. So the question comes in, you have a student who wants to use a laptop in the class. Some instructors allow that, some instructors don't. If it is an accommodation, then it may be required by law. If not, then it may be the instructor's prerogative. What we ask instructors to do is, whatever you want to do, we're here to, we want to support you in that as part of your academic freedom. We ask that you try and be consistent and think about, could you do that for all students? So if you have a student who may have a legitimate need to use a dictionary, would you let other students do that in other circumstances? It may be something that you would want to have them test at a different time so that you could monitor their use of a dictionary. It may be something that you partner with the Office of International Students and Scholars, or you may review the dictionary and just let them use it in the front row close to you when people are taking their exam. But do try to be consistent. So if you're trying to do it for one student, then be sure that you would do it for other students if they had similar situation. Yes, Ashley.
So I'm just wondering what your advice would be. You have a student who requires accommodations and they go to the testing center for their exams.
Yep.
And the student approaches you and says, I don't want to be treated differently in class.
Mm-hmm.
I am worried because people will see me not here for the exam and I don't want them to think I'm not able to participate in group work. How would you address the student in the situation?
There's a couple of different ways that you could do it, and it would really depend on what the instructor was most comfortable with. Honestly, when students are taking exams, usually they're so focused on themselves that they're not worried about other students. That would be my first approach. And then the question is, even if we move the exam and the student takes it in the DRC at a different time, if they come to your class, what are they going to do while the rest of the class is sitting there taking the exam? So I would say people are absent for various and sundry reasons. It's nobody's business, and thankfully, most people aren't that interested in the lives of their other classmates. So I have had that question raised before. Let me share a few really positive stories about my work, the things that get me up in the morning. And I had a young man. I started out my career running a testing center. That seems to be one of our focal points of today's talk. And I'd been in the job about 6 months, and that's long enough to know quite a bit. And I had a student show up for their exam 2 hours early just to sit in the room. Now, if you've ever been in the testing business, it's never good when people want to show up that early. And he started looking around, and he was so nervous. And he said, I have various and sundry disabilities, and I'm just so worried about these exams. And then he asked me this. He said, if I start to have a panic attack and I need to lay on the floor, is that something we can do? I said, if you feel like you need to do that, let me know and we'll figure something out. But because we offered such a consistent place for him to be, by the end of the semester, he said, having this service allows me to come in, take the exams, and know that I can do well. So that made me happy. The second example comes from my background in assistive technology. And I had a young lady in. She was in her senior year getting ready to go into graduate school. And she had made an appointment with me and wanted to learn about what all of this assistive technology is about. So I sat down and I showed her Kurzweil, which is one of the softwares that is a text-to-speech software. So it takes text and it reads it to you. And I sat her down and I put on one of the textbook examples. And I showed her how to use the software. And she looked at me. And she said, I don't have to have my mom read my assignments to me anymore. and then I took her and I showed her Dragon Naturally Speaking. Who here knows what Dragon Naturally Speaking is? Okay, who here has a smartphone that could do something like this? Okay, Google, what time is it? Okay, Google, what time is it? It's not working. I mean, I have good reception. But that's supposed to trigger my phone to take that question, to put it into text, and to ask the Google search engine what that answer is. So, all of those technologies were originally designed as assistive technologies for people with disabilities. They were done by a company called Nuance. And Nuance makes a program called Dragon Naturally Speaking that allows you to dictate text and to control a computer solely by voice commands. They also have two specialized products. One is Dragon Legal for attorneys and Dragon Medical for physicians. But again, all of those technologies have morphed into Google Now and to Siri. So the next time you hit your iPhone, thank disability researchers. All right. Yes, ma'am.
For tutoring, I know you guys offer tutoring here, but do you have any like outsized resources where you refer students?
Okay, we currently do not offer tutoring services in the DRC. We refer to the Academic Success Center and to TRIO.
Mm-hmm.
TRIO, they've got several programs that people would meet for various needs. Also would refer to the Writing Center. All right. So let's take the list here that I provided you, packet of information. And I just want to go over these different technologies and how you could use them to provide access for people with disabilities. If you're on the side that I'm on, it begins with creating accessible Word documents. And Microsoft Word is a powerful tool. Most of you will use it all throughout your life. I think we've done a bargain with Bill Gates, as it were. So, as I mentioned earlier, a screen reader can tell the difference between headings and styles. It can't tell the difference between fonts and sizes. So, as you're structuring your document, you can use all of the beautiful text and styles that you want to use. Just make sure that behind the scenes you're turning on you're structuring it using headings to give your document the proper structure. Who's ever hit that little button that turns on the printer's marks in Microsoft Word? So when you hit that, what it's doing is it's telling you what the computer is saying. It's used for people who lay out documents for a living so they can tell if there really is an extra space in that sentence or not. But that's a good way if you're checking documents to see what will this really look like to the computer and to the software. The next piece of software is, that's Word for Mac. There we go. All right, PDF conversion. If there's one thing from a technical perspective that you can take from this talk today, I hope that it's this. PDFs can be one of the best things and one of the worst things in my life. And it all depends on how they are laid out. The PDF format itself has the ability inside it to be completely accessible if things are built right. It actually has a really cool feature. How you make a PDF document accessible is you go through the PDF and you answer questions about it. So you would go in, you would access the accessibility checker under options, so options, accessibility checker, and it will run a test on the whole PDF document, and it will tell you what it thinks it is seeing and what it can't see. And you as the user can go through point by point and tell it what is right. So imagine that you had a PDF document and it has a column splitting it down the middle, and then it has a column in the middle of the page, so you've got text in 4 quadrants. Well, your eyes may be able to know that I'm supposed to read quadrant 1 and then quadrant 2, which is across from quadrant 1, not down from quadrant 1, then jump back to the bottom side of quadrant 3 and quadrant 4. But there's nothing that'll tell a computer that that's the structure all the time. So if there's one sin of faculty members and other people, of everybody that uses PDF, is that they will scan the document as an image PDF and it totally strips out all of the functions of it. You can use, I think the best way to create a PDF document of something like a syllabus is to write the document in Microsoft Word and then use the Save As PDF function, because that will carry over underneath all of those document characteristics that we discussed before. Let me say, this is not only should you do this because it'll give you the warm fuzzies and it's the right thing to do. I literally believe that for faculty members coming up through graduate programs, this is going to be an issue that search committees and universities are looking at. And if you can learn how to structure your courses in a way that is accessible, I believe that it could someday soon be a skill set that would be as important as your ability to mentor students through the graduate process. Because Harvard and MIT last year just had a lawsuit for their edX program. That, it started out as this amazing project. We're going to take the world's best education and put it online for people all over the world to access, regardless of income or location. Well, that all sounded well and good until several individuals who were deaf saw that they didn't have any closed captions on any of the videos. So they sued under the ADA and Section 504 that I mentioned earlier. And Harvard argued that edX is not an official Harvard program, not like our on-campus classes, so we shouldn't have to make them accessible. The court got involved and they ended up settling and saying that yes, they did have to meet the same standards. If you'll remember, Netflix has recently been in several battles where they said, we don't have a brick and mortar location, so we shouldn't have to follow the same ADA regulations that a brick and mortar location would in as far as accessibility. And they've settled and they've determined that in the future all of their content will be closed captioned. Now, we don't have any children in this room today, but imagine that you're a parent and your child is asleep and you can't turn up the TV loud enough to hear the dialogue without waking your child. It might be nice to turn on those closed captions and catch the rest of an episode of House of Cards. Certain companies, T-Mobile, has found that when they make their video and their materials accessible, people are more likely to do trainings because they don't have to actually take time out of their workday. They could take part of their lunch or a time when it's slow and they could sit at that terminal and watch the video and read the text. We will be recording this lecture, so over time, many more times people will hear me give this lecture online than heard it here today. PowerPoint. So when you are creating PowerPoints, are you putting the structure in place? The big thing with both with websites and PowerPoint and Word documents and textbooks is, are you tagging your images? So an image tag is something where a screen reader will go along and it will read the text. When it comes on the image, if it's been properly formatted, it will then read the description that the author has given to the image. So that would be a great tool for you to learn to utilize. Excel, and then PDF documents, and the two final pages here, creating accessible electronic content and web accessibility issues. The great thing is, if you're trying and you're putting the structure in place, the chances are that your content will be a lot easier to fix in the future. Nobody expects you to be a disability expert. I have several members of my staff that even I lean on a weekly basis to address certain issues. So my point of doing this talk today is to raise awareness. And if it causes some faculty member to give us a call and to get help with these issues, then it's totally worth it. Because we are here to support you. We will work with you to understand how you can do things in the right way. All right. Thank you very much, and I'm always open for more questions. Thank you.